Right, I think we're off. Brilliant. Well, welcome to another Earth Live lesson organised by the fantastic Lizzie Daly. So thank you very much, Lizzie, for getting us all on here. It's a brilliant scheme. It's getting so many people talking about all sorts of things to do with the natural world. Brilliant. My name is Dr Christian Dunn. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Natural Sciences at Bangor University in the beautiful North Wales. And ever since I've been a kid, growing up in the countryside, I have been fascinated with natural history and our wildlife. And I'm really lucky now that I get to study natural history and wildlife for my job as a living. I study and research on a whole range of different topics. Recently, I've got into looking at microplastics, so tiny pieces of plastics, and looking at how they are moving around in our water. But fundamentally, I'm actually a wetlands scientist, and I study wetlands all around the world, from Florida to Siberia. Fantastic kind of job to do. But I want to start this session by getting you to think about your favorite natural habitat, your favorite ecosystem. So have a think what it is. And you're probably thinking something like the deep ocean, or a forest, a jungle, maybe even the desert. Probably what you're not thinking about is a bog, a mire, a swamp. But what I want to do is to show you that those habitats, those wetland habitats, are the superheroes of the natural world, and they should be at the top of your list of all-time favorite habitats. What do I mean, though, by a wetland? A wetland is a really interesting area because there's lots of different types, but they all share some similar characteristics. And one of those characteristics is where they are. And where they are is a boundary between truly terrestrial or truly land and truly water, aquatic or marine. They are this zone in between which share characteristics of the land and the water. In fact, it's been said that, you know, when someone asked a wetland scientist, well, what is a wetland? Where are they? He said, well, to work in a wetland, you don't need shoes, you don't need a boat. What you need are these. You need a trusty pair of wellies. If you've got wellies, you can work in a wetland, because a wetland is a soggy, damp place. It's not land, it's not water, it's a bit in between. And scientists get very kind of het up about the different types of wetlands and categorizing them. But really, there's two main types of wetlands. We've got our coastal wetlands found along the coast. And these are the mangroves and the salt marshes. And then we have our inland wetlands as well. So these are your marshes, your freshwater swamps, your fens and your bogs. They're obviously not tidal, they're not saline, but those are the two main types. You've got your coastal and you've got your freshwater. But in this session, I just want to give you 4 reasons why wetlands are the superheroes of the natural world and why they should be your favorite habitat. First reason is, and my daughters did some fantastic posters, so I hope you can see that. So there you go. This is the first reason why wetlands are the best habitat: biodiversity. What do I mean by biodiversity? In this case, I'm thinking about the number and of different species and the actual physical number of species of living plants and animals that you find there. Wetlands are amongst the most biodiverse locations on the planet. They are teeming with wildlife. Take mangroves, for example. These are coastal swamps found along the tropics. They are the nurseries for the entire ocean. So many living creatures rely on the safe areas that these mangroves create in their root systems. They are also crucial for the whole food webs of the ocean and the land as well. They have everything there, from the bacteria and the mollusks right up to the top predators like tigers and eagles. And many of the animals and the birds and the fish are specially adapted for living in these conditions that's created in these mangrove habitats. And the plants as well. You can never forget the plants in wetlands too. The trees that make up these mangrove swamps are incredible. Some of them have roots that act like snorkels sticking out of the ground and out of the water to get oxygen down into the root system. They're called pneumatophores, and they work just like snorkels. Other mangrove trees have a specialized branch and root system which can kind of drag the tree out into the sea. And others kind of leach out salt from their leaves, incredibly adapted for living in these harsh conditions. And that's just one type of wetland, that's just mangroves. Then we've got the freshwater swamps, the marshes and the fens, all these other types of wetlands which play host to, or the home for many of your favorite species, from orangutans to alligators. But why are wetlands so biodiverse? Well, one of the reasons is because of the first thing that we talked about, this zone that they find themselves in, this area that's not quite water, not quite land. This boundary zone, it's called an ecotone. It's where two kind of habitats meet. So what you have is you have species which are specially adapted for living in this wetland zone, but you also get visitors from the land and from the sea. They come to the wetlands and they use it for food, they use it for shelter and protection. So that's reason number one why wetlands are so brilliant. It's because they're so biodiverse. But reason number two is cleaning water. Thank you to my daughters for doing these. Cleaning water. Wetlands, well, let's stop thinking about wetlands for a minute. Think about your kidneys right now. So two organs here which filter the waste material from the blood, keep your blood clean. Wetlands are like the landscape's kidneys. They filter out and clean water from rivers and water that's running off fields, from towns and from cities. They do this because of fantastic relationships between the plants that you find in wetlands, the soil, the substrate, and the microbes living there as well. And they can clean a huge range of different pollutants. In fact, they're so good at cleaning water that we now build artificial wetlands to treat a whole range of pollutants, of nasty chemicals. And these can be things like human sewage, de-icing material from runways, pharmaceutical waste, and even at Bangor University, we're looking to see whether they can filter out microplastics to keep our waters cleaner and free from microplastics. So our wetlands act as our kidneys to the landscape. They are cleaning our water all the time. And now we've cottoned onto this and we're building wetlands to treat our water as well. That was reason number two. The third reason is flood protection. Now, this may seem a little bit counterintuitive that wetlands can help stop flooding because wetlands are, well, wet, but they can. They can prevent some of the dangerous effects of flooding. And they do this because good, healthy wetlands can act as like a giant sponge, soaking up water. They can also slow down the flow of excess water following storm events as well. So we have these kind of natural preventative systems to stop the flooding further downstream of cities and towns. And in particular, one wetland animal is brilliant at slowing the flow during storm events, and that is the beaver. Now, this wonderful rodent builds those iconic dams, which we've all kind of seen. But these dams are quite special. They're not solid dams which stop all water whatsoever. What they are is leaky dams. They allow a certain percentage of the water in any kind of river system to flow through, trickle through, but they hold the most of it back. So when you get a storm event, when you get loads of rainfall, what happens is the river swells and goes all the way down the river system, hits one of these leaky dams, and then it just slows the flow. It trickles through. So you don't get that spike of high water further downstream in towns and cities where you just don't want it. So, in fact, beavers are so good at building these leaky dams that human engineers have now cottoned onto this again, and we are now starting to build leaky dams around areas that we want to protect. But the beavers have been doing it for years, and they do it for free. It's no wonder that they're called ecosystem engineers. And in fact, I'll just take a little diversion now to talk one of my favourite stories about beavers, because they are a brilliant wetland animal. Now, in the 1940s, in America, late 1940s, early 1950s, there were in certain parts of America, in Iowa, there were lots of beavers in certain parts of the state where they were causing a bit of trouble, and there were too many of them. So what they were starting to do was they started to move beavers around to other locations for various reasons. They wanted to create kind of different colonies of them for their pelts, for their fur, but also they were beginning to understand how good they were for preventing flooding. But capturing a beaver from where it's not wanted to taking it somewhere else, it's quite a tricky process to do. Beavers don't really like being picked up and handled. And where the American researchers were doing it was they were trying to do it in quite remote areas. They wanted to get these beavers sort of away from habitation. So how were they going to do it? Well, they started loading beavers onto lorries, capturing them, put them onto lorries, taking them over roads, then taking them off the lorries, putting them on donkeys and horses and transporting them that way. Really long, arduous journeys. And unfortunately, lots of the beavers, they died from this. So one chap came up with this ingenious idea to parachute beavers out of aeroplanes. So what they did was they captured the old beaver, and then they worked out a way to put a beaver in a specialized crate and then throw it out of an aeroplane where it was wanted. The beaver would float down happily on the parachute, and then when it hit the ground, the cage would open and the beaver would go off and carry on being a beaver where it was more needed. And they had to go through a lot of not training. They had to go through a lot of practice to get the right crate to parachute these beavers into the areas, but thankfully very few beavers perished in the process. But there was this one beaver which they used for a lot of the training called Geronimo, and he became a favorite with the researchers, and he became so used to being thrown out of an airplane during these test flights that eventually, once he landed, he wouldn't run off at all. He'd just sit and wait to be picked up and put on another crate to be thrown out again. So a fascinating story about beavers there, and it is actually a scientific paper. So if you want to read more about it, you can go and read a scientific paper about how to throw a beaver out of an aeroplane. So there we go. That's reason number 3 why wetlands are fantastic. But I have saved the best to last. Reason number 4 why wetlands are the superheroes of the natural world is because of this: climate control. Wetlands can control our climate. How do they do this? Well, wetland plants take in CO2, carbon dioxide, like all plants do through photosynthesis. But unlike in other habitats, like a forest or somewhere else, when the plants die in certain types of wetlands, what happens is the plants don't decompose. They don't rot away. Because of the waterlogged conditions that's in these wetlands, they don't rot away. So all the carbon that's gone in to make that plant doesn't get broken down by microbes and then released back as CO2, which then goes back into the atmosphere. It stays locked up in sort of a semi-decomposed plant goo in these wetlands. And that plant goo, that is actually peat. And peat makes up a certain range of wetlands called peatlands. And peatlands are the world's most important terrestrial store of carbon. So everyone always thinks that, oh, there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Global warming, problem, yes. So what are we going to do? Plant trees. Trees take in CO2 through photosynthesis, keep it locked up for the life cycle of the tree. Brilliant. Forests are amazing stores of carbon dioxide and carbon. Yes, but peatlands. Peatlands are the superheroes of the natural world if you want to start sucking up carbon dioxide. So when everyone always talks about trees and sucking up carbon dioxide with forests, peatlands, that's what you want. In fact, peatlands contain at least twice the amount of carbon than we have in all the world's forests, and yet they take up just a fraction of the Earth's surface. So peatlands are the best terrestrial stores of carbon that we have. So that was reason number 4 why wetlands are the superheroes of the natural world and why they should be at the top of your list for your favorite habitats. But like all superheroes, they need a sidekick. They need help sometimes, and that's where we come in, because the help that our wetlands need is that we have for many years, we've degraded, we've drained, we've dug up, we've cut down our wetlands. We've not respected them. We've not understood how important they are. Go to the garden centre and you will see bags of peat-based compost. This has come from a peatland. That peat compost that you have has taken thousands of years to produce, locking up immeasurable amounts of carbon, and we are just using it for our gardening compost. Fortunately, though, we are now starting to understand just how important our wetlands are. And there are lots of organisations now, like the wildlife trusts in the UK and all around the world, who are now starting to kind of protect and look after our wetlands. And that's hopefully what you can help with now, because hopefully I've given you a taster, a snapshot of how brilliant our wetlands are. So hopefully now you will, when given the chance, do your bit to help wetlands however you possibly can, whether it's going out and volunteering with the local wildlife trust, whether it's not buying peat-based compost, whatever it is. Go out and enjoy your wetlands when you can, and hopefully you can help save them and look after them and understand their importance in the future. So thank you very much for listening. My name is Dr. Christian Dunn. I'm a wetland scientist at Bangor University. You can follow me on Twitter at Christian Dunn at Twitter, which links are probably down below, and Instagram. And you can follow me at research I do at the Bangor University website. Big project that I'm involved in is looking at microplastics in all the UK national parks. So if you want to read about that, go to weswimwild.com. That's a project we're about to launch or are launching now, when we can get back out into the national parks to do the swimming and the collecting. But I see that actually we've got some questions here down the side. So I'm going to read through those. And if anyone has any questions, please fire them off and I'll try and answer them as much as possible. Great. Okay, this might have been covered already, but what is the main difference between bogs, swamps, fens, etc.? Or do they just have different names depending on where they are found? Oh, brilliant question. I could get really geeky about this because the definition of wetlands is an area of science all in itself. And different countries do speak about them differently, but lesson 101 on different wetland types: a fen and a bog. These are peatlands, okay? So the ones that store all the carbon. Difference between a fen and a bog. A fen gets its water from anywhere, from the rain, from a lake, from water coming up, kind of water coming down, all sorts of ways a fen, a peatland, can get its water. A bog only gets its water from precipitation. That's the main difference between those. A marsh is a mineral soil-based wetland, and a swamp is a mineral soil-based wetland, so not a peatland, and they are forested. So those are kind of the main differences there. Hope it answers your question, Alex Cunningham. What are the main risks to wetland habitats? Oh, God, these questions are great. Main risks are human. Okay, so we are probably the greatest risk of wetlands. We've seen wetlands as a problem a lot of the time. We think that they're wet, they're soggy, they get in the way. We want to build on this area. It's just a hassle. I don't want it. So we have drained them. We have dug them up when it comes to peatlands to kind of use in horticulture or even to burn. So we are the main problems. We cut down mangrove swamps. We've adjusted the flow of water so we get a mangrove diebacks in certain areas. So we are the main problem. But as well, obviously, climate change as well is changing where certain types of wetlands can actually exist. So climate change is having an issue there too. But the destruction of what we do to our wetlands, that's the biggest problem, really. So we go. What are your thoughts on habitat management on wetlands? Trying to keep these areas productive can be difficult due to rank vegetation and encroaching trees. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so Hugh Panton. Wetland management is, if you're doing kind of conservation, it's a minefield, because it depends what you want to do, whether you want to conserve an area of wetland to what it was historically, or whether you want to allow some sort of succession. So that's the first question that you have to ask. But then what you're addressing there is a lot of vegetation in wetlands can become almost monocultures. So you get reeds kind of dominating, or sawgrass, or a certain species kind of starting to dominate. And what you then want to do is you need to kind of remove that vegetation and cut it down, because it does create this thick thatch underneath where then nothing can penetrate, and you start to kind of lose some of the qualities that wetlands have for breaking down pollutants as well. So you do have to kind of think about how you're going to manage certain wetlands. What we have done in the past, or we do is conservation grazing can be really useful for this in certain types of wetlands. So this is when we kind of get specific animals, such as certain breeds of cattle and ponies, to graze wetlands. It all depends on the type of wetland it is and what vegetation issues that you have. But that's one thing that you can do. Other than that, it is a lot of times it's actual physical labor of cutting down, digging, burning as well. It's a controversial issue, but in certain types of wetland management, burning can be a way to kind of control the vegetation there. Beavers thrown out of airplanes. It's an interesting one. Thank you. Question: how do wetlands compare to other habitats like rainforests in terms of carbon capture? Wetlands are much better than forests at carbon capture. However, what you do get is this kind of really interesting crossover, because when you're talking about rainforests for storing carbon, you've got two issues there. Okay, so you've got the trees, obviously, and the biomass, the vegetation sucking up all that CO2, massive amount of carbon stored there. But a lot of rainforests are actually peat swamps. So a lot of the carbon as well gets stored underneath the trees or the vegetation as peat. So it's an interesting one. So peat swamps, so your rainforests which have peat underneath them, they are the kind of the gold standard for carbon sequestration. So thanks, Lizzie. Why did you get interested in wetlands? I don't know. I don't know why I got interested in wetlands, especially quite so much. As a kid, I guess my favourite kind of, because I grew up on the Staffordshire-Shropshire border, so it's very agricultural. And my favourite place was probably the ditches between the fields, because that was kind of all biodiverse area compared to the kind of the fields. And I just like wearing wellies and getting muddy, I guess. So that was probably why. Are there any wetland wildlife specialists that could be lost if wetlands are not conserved? Wildlife specialists. I'm sure if we lose some wildlife, some of the specialists that study them may find themselves out of a job. But hopefully that's not going to happen. And we're all going to keep going with wetlands. Jake Brass. I think Jake's one of my students from Bangor University, or former students. Great lad. Favourite wetland bird? Ooh, wetland bird. Oh, I'm going to go with classic heron. Yeah, grey heron in the UK. I think I like the fact they look like kind of Lancaster bombers when they're flying. I kind of like herons. So there we go. Thanks so much. How difficult is it to create new wetland habitats? Okay. Really good question. It depends what you want to do. Okay, so for example, in Chester, where I live in Chester, we are going to hopefully be building at the Chester Wetland Centre in a park near here, and it's an area that's direct quality of water, and it doesn't have water at the right sort of levels that we want. So we're going to have to be adjusting that. So that's relatively straightforward to do. It's relatively expensive to do as well, because you need kind of like a engineering, and you need to do some monitoring as well about what you're doing. So creating wetlands can be relative. If you've got a water source, then this can be relatively easy. I mean, if you have a garden that has a water source or a pond system, you can create a mini wetland if you wanted to. Don't forget, a wetland is just this barrier between truly terrestrial and truly land. So you can create one relatively easy, small scale in your garden, but creating them on a large scale, first of all, it's a very important thing for us to do, and we should be looking to do it as much as we possibly can, for loads of reasons. We've lost so much wetland areas, because we've built on it, or drained it, or overgrazed it, or whatever, and we've destroyed them. So we need to be thinking about recreating or establishing better wetlands. And then we start looking at what type of wetland that you want. So for example, the Chester example, we're trying to create a wet meadow. So that needs specific requirements. It needs a specific quality of water, or a certain amount of water. And we also need to think about how we're going to graze or manage the vegetation that's on that side. So it's doable, and we should be doing it more. And organizations like the Wildlife Trusts, they are looking at doing it. So there we go. I think that answers that, hopefully. Is there any interesting wetland research currently being done at Bangor University? Again, this is Will, who is another of my students, research students. And yes, there is some phenomenal wetland research going on at Bangor University, led by the Bangor Wetlands Group, of which Will and many other students are members of. So there we go. I think that's it. I think I've run out of time as well. So apologies to Lizzie for overrunning out of time, but I think that's it. I think I'm out, unless there's any questions. No, that's it. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. And there will be, obviously, another Earth Live lesson very soon. And again, thanks to Lizzie Daly for sorting all these out. Brilliant initiative. So thank you very much, Lizzie. And thanks for inviting me here. Thank you.